The scorching desert sun hung like a vengeful eye over Tucson, Arizona territory, as Piper Pratt clutched her swollen belly with one hand and her dead husband's wedding ring with the other. 6 months pregnant, and 3 days without a proper meal. Desperation had driven her to the general store where the proprietor's cold eyes assessed the gold band with calculated indifference. Vincent Nash noticed her the moment he stepped through the doorway, dust still settling from his long ride. The trail-worn cowboy paused, his spurs silent for once as he watched the scene unfold before him. "Madam, I can't give you more than $2 for it," the shopkeeper said, pushing the ring back across the counter. "Gold's hardly worth anything these days." "Please," Piper whispered, her voice cracking. "It's worth at least 20. I just need enough for food this week." Vincent could see the lie in the shopkeeper's eyes. The ring was worth considerably more than $2, even in 1878 when times were hard across the territory. He'd seen enough predators in his 30 years, both the 4-legged and 2-legged kind, to recognize one sizing up easy prey. "I'll take that ring for $50, Vincent said, stepping forward and setting his hat on the counter. His voice, though quiet, filled the small store. The shopkeeper and Piper both turned to look at him, startled by his intervention. "Mister, this ain't your business," the shopkeeper said. "I'm making it my business." Vincent's hand moved to his belt, not near his gun, but to the leather purse tied there. He untied it and set it on the counter. "Actually, forget the ring. The lady'll be keeping that." He pushed the entire purse toward Piper. "Madam, I reckon this'll cover whatever supplies you need." Piper stared at him, her green eyes wide with disbelief. "Sir, I can't." "You can and you will," Vincent said firmly, but not unkindly. His eyes, the color of faded denim, held hers. "No strings attached," the shopkeeper frowned. "Now listen here." "No, you listen," Vincent said, still not raising his voice. "You'll give the lady whatever supplies she needs up to the amount in that purse. And you'll do it with a smile, or I'll have a word with Sheriff Dawson about how you've been treating the widows in this town." Piper felt her cheeks burn with a mixture of gratitude and shame. "How did you know I'm a widow?" Vincent's eyes softened. "The way you're holding that ring, madam. Like it's your last connection to someone you've lost." The shopkeeper, recognizing defeat, cleared his throat. "What'll it be, Mrs. Pratt?" she said quietly. "Piper Pratt." An hour later, Vincent helped load the supplies into a small wagon Piper had borrowed from her neighbor. Flour, beans, salt pork, coffee, sugar, and even a small bag of hard candies, luxuries she hadn't been able to afford since her husband Daniel had died in a mining accident 3 months prior. "Mr. Nash, I don't know how to thank you," Piper said, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders despite the heat. "No need for thanks," Vincent replied, securing the last sack of supplies. "And it's Vincent, if you don't mind." "Vincent," she repeated, the name feeling strange on her lips. "I will pay you back every cent." He shook his head. "Consider it a gift." "I can't accept such charity," she insisted, pride flaring briefly through her desperation. Vincent studied her for a moment. "Then consider it a loan if that sits better with you." Relief washed over her face. "It does, thank you." "Where are you headed with all this?" he asked, gesturing to the loaded wagon, "just outside town. I have a small homestead that Daniel and I started building before." Her voice trailed off, one hand instinctively moving to her rounded belly. Vincent nodded, understanding the unspoken grief. "Would you mind if I escorted you? These roads can be dangerous for a woman alone." Under normal circumstances, Piper might have refused. But these weren't normal circumstances, and something about the quiet cowboy's steady gaze made her trust him despite her usual caution. "I'd appreciate that," she said. The ride to Piper's homestead took just over an hour. Vincent rode alongside the wagon, occasionally scanning the horizon with the watchful eyes of a man accustomed to anticipating trouble. Piper found herself studying him when she thought he wasn't looking his weathered face, the way he sat easy in the saddle, the gun at his hip that looked like it had seen use but wasn't worn for show. The homestead, when they reached it, was modest but promising. A small cabin stood partially completed, the roof finished but some of the exterior walls still needing work. A vegetable garden showed signs of careful tending despite the harsh conditions. Daniel was going to finish it before winter, Piper explained as they approached. He was good with his hands. Vincent dismounted, tying his horse to a post. Looks like solid work. He was a carpenter before he took the mining job, she said, her voice catching. The mine was supposed to be just temporary until we saved enough to buy more lumber. Vincent helped her down from the wagon, his hands strong and sure on her waist. For a moment, Piper felt something stir inside her that had been dormant since Daniel's death, a flicker of awareness of herself as a woman. Not just a widow, not just a mother-to-be. The feeling both frightened and exhilarated her. "Let me help you unload these supplies," Vincent said, breaking the moment. Over the next hour, they worked together to store the provisions and secure the wagon. Vincent noticed the leaky roof in one corner of the cabin and the broken hinges on the door. "I could fix those for you," he offered as they stood in the doorway. Piper hesitated. "You've already done more than enough." "I've got nowhere particular to be," he admitted. "Was headed to my brother's ranch down in Sonora, but he's not expecting me for another couple weeks." She considered his offer. Having a man around to help with the repairs would be a blessing, but she hardly knew him. Still, there was something trustworthy about Vincent Nash, something solid and honorable. "I can pay you with meals," she said finally, "but I can't offer much else right now." Vincent smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his weathered face. "That's more than fair, Mrs. Pratt." "Piper, please," she said, returning his smile hesitantly. That night, Vincent slept in the barn, refusing Piper's offer of the cabin's sole bedroom. After a simple but satisfying dinner of beans and cornbread, they'd sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. "How far along are you?" Vincent asked, nodding toward her belly. 6 months, Piper replied. "The baby's due in January." "You planning to stay out here, alone with a newborn?" She lifted her chin. "I don't have many options. This land is all I have left of Daniel, all our child will have." Vincent nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "It's good land, with water nearby and rich soil in that bottom plot." "That's what Daniel said when he staked the claim." Piper's voice softened with memory. "He had such plans for this place." They fell silent, each lost in their own thoughts as darkness settled over the desert. The coyotes began their nightly chorus, a sound that had once frightened Piper but now seemed like a familiar lullaby. Vincent stayed for 3 days, repairing the roof, fixing the door, and reinforcing the walls. He worked from dawn to dusk, stopping only for the meals Piper prepared. They fell into an easy routine, their conversations growing less stilted, more natural. On the 4th day, as Vincent was repairing a broken window frame, Piper approached with a glass of water. "You work as hard as 2 men," she observed, handing him the drink. He accepted it gratefully, taking a long swallow before responding. "My pa believed idle hands were the devil's workshop, couldn't sit still a day in his life." "Is he still living?" Piper asked, settling herself on a nearby stump. Vincent shook his head. "Lost both my parents in '63. Pa to the war, ma to typhoid right after." "I'm sorry," Piper said softly. "My parents died when I was 16. Wagon accident." Vincent set the empty glass down. "Seems we've both had our share of loss." "Yes," she agreed, "but we're still here." Something passed between them, then an understanding, a recognition of shared grief and resilience. Vincent returned to his work, but Piper remained, watching his strong hands transform broken things into whole ones. That evening, a summer storm rolled in from the mountains, bringing with it driving rain and spectacular lightning that illuminated the desert in harsh flashes. Vincent rushed to secure the animals while Piper hurried inside to close the shutters he'd repaired. By the time he made it back to the cabin, Vincent was soaked to the skin, water dripping from his hat and clothes onto the plank floor. "Here," Piper said, handing him a towel and turning her back modestly. "You can change into these." They were Daniel's. Vincent accepted the dry clothes with a nod of thanks, stepping behind a makeshift screen to change. The clothes fit well enough. Daniel had been a large man too, though perhaps not as broad in the shoulders as Vincent. When he emerged, Piper had lit the lamps and was stoking the small fire in the hearth. The cabin felt suddenly intimate, the storm outside creating a cocoon of isolation around them. "Storm's likely to last through the night," Vincent said, settling into a chair at the small table. Piper nodded, her back still to him. The desert always needs the rain. A particularly violent crack of thunder made her jump, one hand flying to her belly as she turned. "Are you all right?" Vincent asked, half rising from his chair. "Yes," she said, flushing slightly. "Just startled." And the baby kicked in response. Vincent's expression softened with curiosity. "The baby can feel the thunder." "The baby feels everything," Piper said, a small smile playing at her lips. "Every emotion, every sound. At least, that's what my mother always told me." Vincent sat back down, watching as she moved around the small kitchen, preparing a pot of tea. There was a grace to her movements despite her advanced pregnancy, a quiet dignity that touched something deep within him. "Thank you," he said suddenly. Piper looked up, surprised. "For what?" "For trusting me enough to let me stay and help." She considered his words as she poured the tea into two mismatched cups. "I think sometimes God sends us the help we need, even if it comes in unexpected forms." "Is that what I am?" Vincent asked. "Help from God?" Piper handed him a cup, their fingers brushing briefly. "What else would you be, Mr. Nash? Just a lonely cowboy who happened upon a woman in need," he thought, but didn't say. Instead, he sipped his tea and listened to the rain pound against the newly repaired roof. The storm continued through the night and into the next day. The usually dry creek bed behind the property swelled into a rushing stream, and the roads turned to mud, making travel impossible. Vincent spent the day reinforcing the barn and digging trenches to direct water away from the garden and cabin. By evening, exhausted and mud-spattered, he returned to find Piper kneading bread dough, her face flushed from the heat of the oven. "You shouldn't be working so hard," he said, removing his boots at the door. "Neither should you," she countered, "but here we both are." Vincent smiled, struck by her spirit. Most women in her condition, widowed, pregnant, alone, would have given up, returned to family if they had any, or sought refuge with the church. But Piper Pratt stood her ground, defending her small piece of the world with quiet determination. As the days passed, Vincent found more and more reasons to delay his departure. There was always another repair, another improvement to make a chicken coop, a proper outhouse, reinforced fencing. Each evening they would sit together, sometimes talking, sometimes in comfortable silence. One night, 2 weeks after his arrival, Piper asked the question that had been hovering between them. "What's waiting for you in Sonora, Vincent?" He looked up from the piece of wood he was whittling, his hands stilling. "My brother's ranch. He's offered me a place there, a stake in the business." "Is that what you want?" she asked. Vincent considered the question. "It's more than most men get, a chance at something permanent." "But is it what you want?" Piper persisted. He set the whittling aside. I've been riding from place to place since I was 18. Worked as a ranch hand, a trail guide, even tried my hand at bounty hunting for a spell. Never stayed anywhere long enough to put down roots. And now, Piper asked softly. Vincent met her gaze. Now I'm thinking maybe roots wouldn't be such a bad thing. The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but unmistakable. Piper looked away first, her hands moving to her belly. The baby's active tonight. Vincent nodded, accepting her gentle deflection. Must be strange, carrying a life inside you. Strange and wonderful and terrifying all at once, she admitted. Sometimes I wake in the night and forget for a moment that Daniel is gone. I reach for him, wanting to share the baby's movements. Her voice caught. Then I remember. Vincent understood grief. He'd carried his own for years after losing his parents and later his young wife to childbirth. Time dulled the edges, but the weight remained. May I? He asked suddenly, gesturing toward her belly. Piper hesitated only briefly before nodding. Vincent moved to kneel beside her chair, placing his large, work-roughened hand gently on the curve of her stomach. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, as if in response to his touch, the baby kicked strongly against his palm. Vincent's eyes widened in wonder. That's something, he breathed. Piper laughed, the sound light and musical. He or she is quite the acrobat lately. Vincent left his hand there, feeling the miraculous movements of new life. Without thinking, he looked up into Piper's face, finding her watching him with an expression that made his heart catch. You have a gentle touch for such a large man, she said softly. My ma always said I was a gentle giant, he replied, his voice equally quiet. Said it would serve me well when I had children of my own. The intimacy of the moment stretched between them, fragile and new. Vincent slowly withdrew his hand, though he remained kneeling beside her. Piper, he began, uncertain how to express the feelings growing within him. She shook her head slightly. It's too soon, Vincent, for both of us, he nodded, accepting her wisdom even as his heart argued otherwise. I know. The next morning, Vincent rode into town for supplies. The general store owner, chastened by their previous encounter, treated him with grudging respect as Vincent purchased lumber, nails, and additional provisions. Mrs. Pratt settling in all right out there? The man asked, wrapping a package of coffee. She's managing, Vincent replied noncommittally. Shame about her husband, the shopkeeper continued. Mining accident took a lot of good men. Vincent nodded, counting out money from his dwindling funds. Folks wondered if she'd head back east, her being in the family way and all. Not many women would try to make a go of it alone out here. Mrs. Pratt isn't most women, Vincent said simply. The shopkeeper studied him for a moment. No, I suppose she isn't. He pushed the parcels across the counter. Town's having a harvest dance this Saturday. Might do Mrs. Pratt good to get out some, be around other folks. Vincent considered this as he loaded his purchases. A social gathering might indeed be good for Piper, who had been isolated in her grief for months. When he returned to the homestead, he found Piper in the garden, harvesting late summer vegetables. Town's having a harvest dance Saturday, he said as he helped her carry the basket of produce inside. Piper looked surprised. I'd forgotten about that tradition. Thought maybe you'd like to go, Vincent suggested, trying to sound casual. Get out, see some other faces besides mine. She hesitated, looking down at her well-worn dress and then at her pregnant form. I don't think I'd be much of a dance partner these days. You don't have to dance, Vincent assured her. Just thought the company might be welcome. Piper considered it, her expression thoughtful. Did you go to many dances before you came here, Vincent? He chuckled. Not by choice, but my brother used to drag me to them, said I needed to practice being around decent folk. That made her smile, And did you practice, I mean? Enough to know my left foot from my right, he admitted. Though no one would mistake me for a dancing master. Piper laughed, the sound warming him from the inside out. I suppose we could make an appearance, she conceded, though I have nothing suitable to wear. Vincent thought for a moment. I noticed a trunk in the barn. Would those be Daniel's things? Piper nodded, her expression clouding slightly. Yes, I couldn't. I haven't been able to go through them yet. There might be fabric, something that could be remade, Vincent suggested gently, if you're ready. She took a deep breath. I suppose it's time. Will you help me bring the trunk in? Together, they retrieved the trunk from the barn. Piper's hands trembled slightly as she opened it, revealing Daniel's neatly folded clothes and personal effects. She lifted out a shirt, holding it to her face for a moment before setting it aside. He was always so tidy, she said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. Said it was the mark of a craftsman to keep his things in order. Vincent remained silent, allowing her this moment with her memories. She continued through the trunk, occasionally sharing a small story about an item or garment. Near the bottom, she found what she was looking for: several yards of fabric Daniel had purchased in town, intending it as a surprise for curtains and perhaps a new dress. He brought this home just a week before the accident, Piper said, running her hands over the blue calico. Said the color reminded him of the spring sky. It's a fine color, Vincent agreed. Would match your eyes. Piper looked up, a flush spreading across her cheeks at his observation. Do you think it's enough for a dress? I think you could make it work, he said with confidence. My ma could make something out of nothing when times were lean. Piper nodded, decision made. Then I'll have a new dress for the dance. Over the next few days, Piper worked on her dress while Vincent continued his improvements to the homestead. Each evening, she would show him her progress, and he would offer encouragement, genuinely impressed by her skill with a needle. By Saturday afternoon, the dress was complete, a simple but elegant design that accommodated her pregnancy while still flattering her figure. Vincent had ridden into town that morning to have a proper bath at the barber's and had his beard trimmed and hair cut. He'd even purchased a new shirt, wanting to look respectable for their evening out. When Piper emerged from her bedroom in her new dress, her hair arranged in soft curls around her face, Vincent felt his breath catch. You look beautiful, he said simply. Piper's cheeks colored prettily. And you look very handsome, Mr. Nash. The ride into town was filled with a nervous energy, both of them aware that this outing represented something significant: Piper's first social event as a widow, and their first public appearance together. The town hall was decorated with autumn harvest bounty pumpkins, corn stalks, and colorful gourds adorned every surface. A small band played lively tunes, and the floor was already crowded with dancers when they arrived. Piper felt the curious stares as Vincent escorted her inside, his hand protectively at her elbow. Whispers followed them, but Vincent's imposing presence deterred any direct comments. Mrs. Pratt, the minister's wife, greeted them. How lovely to see you out. We've all been wondering how you've been managing. I've been fortunate to have help, Piper replied, glancing at Vincent. Mr. Nash has been very kind, assisting with repairs to the homestead. The woman's eyebrows rose slightly, but her smile remained fixed. How fortunate indeed. Please, help yourselves to refreshments. As the evening progressed, Piper found herself relaxing despite the occasional curious glance. Several women from the church approached her, offering condolences and asking about the baby. Vincent remained close, a steady presence that bolstered her confidence. When a slower song began, Vincent turned to her. Would you care to dance if you're feeling up to it? Piper hesitated, suddenly shy. I'm not sure I remember how. That makes two of us, Vincent said with a smile. "We can stumble through together." He led her to the edge of the dance floor, placing one hand respectfully at her waist, the other holding hers. They moved carefully to the music, mindful of her condition. Piper was acutely aware of his nearness, the clean scent of him, the warmth of his hand through the fabric of her dress. "People are watching," she murmured, noticing the glances. "Let them," Vincent replied. "You deserve a moment of happiness, Piper." She looked up at him, struck by the sincerity in his eyes. "And what about you, Vincent? What do you deserve?" His gaze held hers. "More than I ever thought possible these past few weeks." The music ended before she could respond, but his words lingered in her mind as they returned to the sidelines. As the evening wore on, Piper found herself growing tired, the baby particularly active. "Perhaps we should head back," Vincent suggested, noticing her fatigue. Piper nodded gratefully. "I've enjoyed it more than I expected, but I think the little one has had enough dancing for one night." As they prepared to leave, the general store owner approached them, his manner more cordial than in previous encounters. "Mrs. Pratt, Mr. Nash," he greeted them. "Before you go, I wanted to mention that I'll be needing someone to help with inventory next month. Pays fair wages. Thought you might be interested, Mrs. Pratt, given your circumstances." Piper was surprised by the offer. "That's very kind, Mr. Wilson, but with the baby coming—" "I wasn't suggesting you start now," Wilson clarified, "but after, when you're recovered. Work you could do with the little one nearby." Piper glanced at Vincent, who gave a subtle nod of encouragement. "I'll consider it, thank you." As they rode home under the starlit sky, Piper felt a sense of possibility that had been absent since Daniel's death. "That was kind of Mr. Wilson," she said. "Though I suspect your influence had something to do with it." Vincent shrugged. "People aren't always as hard-hearted as they first appear. Sometimes they just need reminding of their better natures." They traveled in companionable silence for a while. The rhythmic clop of hooves against the dirt road the only sound. "When are you planning to leave for Sonora?" Piper asked finally, the question she'd been avoiding. Vincent's hands tightened on the reins. "I've been thinking about that." "And," she prompted when he didn't continue. "And I'm wondering if there might be reasons to stay," he said carefully. "Here in Arizona territory." Piper's heart quickened. "What sort of reasons?" Vincent drew the wagon to a halt, turning to face her in the moonlight. "Piper, I know it's been a short time, and I know you're still grieving Daniel. I would never want to dishonor his memory or rush you into something you're not ready for. But," she whispered, "but I find myself caring for you," he admitted. "More than I expected, more than might be proper given the circumstances." Piper looked down at her hands, at the wedding ring she still wore. "I feel guilt," she confessed, "for feeling anything other than grief." Vincent nodded. "I understand that. When my wife died, I thought I'd never feel anything again, didn't want to for a long time." Piper looked up sharply. "You were married, briefly," he said. "She died in childbirth along with our daughter. I was 22. "I'm so sorry," Piper said, reaching for his hand without thinking. "You never mentioned." "It's not something I talk about often," Vincent admitted. "But I wanted you to know that I understand loss, Piper, and I know that loving again doesn't diminish what you had with Daniel." Tears welled in her eyes. "I'm afraid," she whispered, "of being alone, of failing this child, of opening my heart only to lose everything again." Vincent's hand tightened around hers. "I can't promise that bad things won't happen. Life out here is hard, and none of us know what tomorrow brings. But I can promise that you won't face it alone, not if you'll have me by your side." Piper studied his face in the moonlight, this man who had appeared in her life when she needed him most. A man who had given her his entire purse without hesitation, who had worked tirelessly to secure her home, who looked at her swollen form with admiration rather than pity. I think Daniel would want me to be happy, she said finally. To give our child a father. Is that what you want? Vincent asked, his voice rough with emotion. I'm beginning to think it is, Piper admitted. But I need time, Vincent. Time to be sure, time to let this child come into the world, time to say a proper goodbye to what was before embracing what could be. Vincent nodded, relief and hope mingling in his expression. I have time, Piper, all the time you need. The months that followed were filled with preparation for the baby, for winter, for the future. Vincent formally postponed his trip to Sonora, writing to his brother of his intention to remain in Arizona territory indefinitely. He took odd jobs in town, saving his earnings and continuing to improve the homestead. As Piper's pregnancy advanced, their relationship deepened. Vincent moved from the barn to a small lean-to he constructed adjacent to the cabin, close enough for Piper to call if she needed help but separate enough to maintain propriety. December brought cooler temperatures and the completion of the cabin's interior. Vincent had managed to find a proper bed frame, and neighbors, hearing of Piper's situation and Vincent's dedication, contributed household items, curtains, quilts, cooking pots, transforming the humble structure into a true home. 2 days before Christmas, in the early hours of the morning, Piper went into labor. Vincent rode like a man possessed to fetch the midwife from town, returning to pace anxiously outside as Piper's cries echoed through the cabin walls. After 12 hours of labor on a cold, clear winter night, Piper gave birth to a healthy baby boy. When the midwife finally allowed Vincent inside, he found Piper propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, cradling a tiny bundle in her arms. Meet Daniel Vincent Pratt, she said softly as Vincent approached, named for his father and for the man who saved us both. Vincent's throat tightened with emotion as he gazed down at the perfect, red-faced infant. He's beautiful, Piper. Perfect. Would you like to hold him? She asked. With trembling hands, Vincent accepted the swaddled baby, cradling him with unexpected confidence. Hello, little man, he whispered. Welcome to the world. As spring returned to the desert, bringing wildflowers and new growth, Piper finally removed her wedding ring. She placed it in a small box along with a lock of Daniel's hair and a letter she had written to him, telling him of their son's birth and of the new love that had unexpectedly entered her life. Vincent found her on the porch after she had completed this ritual, her expression peaceful as she watched the sunset. I've been thinking, he said, settling beside her. That land to the east of the property would make good grazing land. If we were to add some cattle, maybe some horses for breeding, we could build something substantial here. Piper smiled, recognizing the future he was mapping out. Vincent took her hand in his. I love you, Piper Pratt. You and that boy in there have become my whole world. I'd like to make it official if you're ready. Piper leaned forward, pressing her lips to his in answer. When she pulled back, her eyes shone with certainty. We're ready. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the town church. Little Daniel, now 4 months old, slept peacefully in the arms of the minister's wife, as his mother and Vincent Nash exchanged vows. That evening, as they stood on the porch of what was now their home, Vincent wrapped his arms around his new wife. Did you ever imagine, he asked, when you were trying to trade your ring for food that day, that this is where you'd end up? Piper turned in his embrace, looking up at him with love. No. But then again, I never imagined a cowboy would empty his purse for a desperate widow he'd never met. Best investment I ever made, Vincent said, lowering his lips to hers as the desert stars winked to life above them, bearing witness to a love born of kindness, nurtured through grief, and blooming now in the promise of tomorrow.